Hi.
Hi, how's it going?
Fine, and you?
Great, fantastic.
Can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Henry Gordon-Smith. I'm co-founder of the Association for Vertical Farming.
Okay. And what are you doing else? You're doing a lot, I think.
Yeah, I also have a consulting business called Blue Planet Consulting, and I run a blog called agritecture.com. And my new business is called AgTech, and it's an incubator for AgTech ideas. So it's like a co-working space where people focus on AgTech. They can get free Wi-Fi and also some small systems and experiment to really focus on those early stage individuals looking to get involved in the industry. Just launching in June this summer.
Cool. Innovative person, I think. Let's start with AVF. You started the Association of Vertical Farming. Can you tell a little bit more about it?
Yeah, so Dr. Dixon Apamier, who's author of The Vertical Farm, he knew Max Losel, our co-founder, and I. We both knew each other separately. And he introduced us, and he said, you guys need to start an association because there's really so many companies out there, this was about 3 years ago, that are starting to get involved in vertical farming, and they're repeating the same mistakes. And so if we get them communicating with each other, we think that we can establish best practices or standards. And that's really important in a new industry. And so that's the problem that the Association for Vertical Farming solves. It's the largest global network of vertical farming companies. It inspires collaboration, it inspires standardization. To give you some idea of some of the things we work on, it's mostly started with events and just getting people talking to each other, but now it's evolved. We do a white paper every year. We also have a standardization group that looks at how do we standardize the language for equipment or the impact, the sustainability impact of these farms. Can we certify them? We also have a new group on new emerging approaches like aquaponics, mushroom cultivation, insect cultivation that are very interesting from a sustainability perspective but are not quite proven yet. So we set up smaller groups within the AVF, mostly made of our 30 volunteers around the world, to really encourage the industry to grow sustainably. And that's our mission.
But where does your passion come from?
My passion? Oh, well, it goes back to when I was in college. And yeah, I mean, I was studying political science. And I started looking at environmental security. So why do nation states act the way that they do? And how does resource scarcity basically lead to that behavior? So they say things like water wars, right? So the US and Canada, for example, they have water wars. And I was studying this from a political perspective. But what I realized is that water and food are very deeply connected. And so when I discovered this, I said, okay, I want to really solve this problem in a meaningful way. And the way to do that is through cities. And so that obviously led me to urban agriculture and vertical farming. So for me, it began really just by meeting some people who were coming up with innovative solutions. I met a young man, and he was farming people's backyards. So he didn't have any farm, he had no land. He was just farming people's backyards and saying, I'll rent your land and I'll farm it, and if we make some money, I'll give you some of the money, but in the worst, you'll get some produce from your land. And he would go street by street and set this up, so he didn't have to rent any property. And I thought, this is a really cool idea, a really cool solution to the problem, and I want to know all of them. And I want to give them a voice, and I want to share them with other people, because that'll inspire other people to come up with ideas. So that's when I started my blog. It was actually 6 years ago, so pretty early for the industry. And I just created a space that would be free and public knowledge with all these inspiring ideas that push us looking towards the future, but also what's happening today. Because a lot of people feel, disconnected from the futuristic vision if they can't see the real business, the real news that's happening now. And so agritecture is all about that, presenting a vision of the future that's very optimistic, but also giving updates on what's really happening today so that you feel inspired and motivated to get involved now.
So you were talking about the future vision, why you started this. What is that future vision?
My future vision is a little bit ambitious, but my future vision is that cities recognize the value that agritecture or the integration of agriculture into the built environment provides, right? They understand the value of that so well that 20% of every physical space, every three-dimensional space must be productive. And productive could be solar panels, it could be water collection, or it could be agriculture. So the future of cities need to be developed. My vision is the future of cities will be developed with a required percentage of all the volume that's built to be productive. Because right now the problem with cities is that they are consumers. They're consuming energy and they're producing waste. They're not producing energy, they're not producing water, they're not producing food. And that's where all of it is being consumed. And so it's about reframing the way we look at cities, from consumers to producers. That's my vision of the future. That's what I'm trying to encourage.
But why is that I understand your passion and your vision future, but why do you want this so badly?
Yeah, it's a tough question, but I think you have to. I don't know, it goes back to my background, I think it goes back to how I was raised. My father is a civil engineer, so I've always been interested in construction and large projects. My mother is a human resource manager, and so she's very motivated by people and corporate culture. So I was taught from a very young age about the importance of people and how you can strengthen them. And I think those things, I really found my place in this vertical farming movement because they bring those things together. It's about inspiring, it's about creating community, but also about architecture and engineering and very technological, very masculine things. But at the same time, it's very soft because it's a movement. It's very optimistic. It's very visionary. It's very unrealistic sometimes. And so I think I found a perfect place for me in that. And I grew up in Hong Kong until I was 6 years old. I was born there, I grew up in Hong Kong, so I lived around skyscrapers all the time, very little space. And then I spent the ages of 6 until 10 in Tokyo. So I was very familiar with these kinds of big cities and how to be efficient in small spaces. So I don't know, it just something clicked 6 years ago when I found the innovators involved in this. And I've just dedicated my life to it since then. I don't know how to explain it otherwise.
Super inspiring. Is it also because you're really worried about the future of the world?
I'm definitely a pessimist. I think that I've spent a lot of time studying climate change. I studied sustainability management at Columbia University as my master's degree. And so we look a lot at how business can solve environmental problems. So one thing I believe for sure, if it's not sustainable, if it's not profitable, that's something that we study a lot. But the fact is, when you look at climate change, there's a time to kind of mitigate, right, prevent it, and then the next stage is adaptation. And I think within the past 5 to 10 years, we've already entered the stage where adaptation has to happen. Mitigation is done. We can't mitigate climate change anymore, unfortunately. The reality is we're going to live in a world with more food scarcity, more water scarcity. I think the energy problem, there is a future to solve that one. But the fact is that food and water are not accounted for properly yet. And so I'm pretty, I would say realistic, but some might say pessimistic about the future. And so I think we have an urgent need to find ways to increase food independence. And this is more than just farms. This is how do we get young people to actually understand how to grow food and understand the food, water, energy nexus. They need to be experts in this because in the future there will not be the availability that there is now.
And how will the Association of Vertical Farming adapt to this? How will you create, for example, that you teach the people and that you teach the youngsters to think different about food or about food waste? How will you play a role in this as the AVF?
It's a great question. So how will the AVF play a role in teaching the new generation to respond to the challenges of climate change? Well, it's difficult starting a grassroots organization, and that's what we are. I mean, we really started, Max and I, and we just put in hours for free and going like this, and now we've grown, like I said, with 30 volunteers. I think every day we inspire young people to get involved, and so what we do is we try to help them find their voice, first of all. So it's a little bit complicated. We serve to serve our members, and our members are often corporations or startups, but at the same time, as a result of our organization, we are raising up young people that volunteer. We're finding them jobs in the industry. We're finding them their voice and how they can share ideas. We're finding them the connections they need to succeed or what education they should pursue. And this is the part that I love the most, is working with our volunteers and saying, someone comes up to me and they say, oh, I'm based in Lisbon and I want to get involved in vertical farming. I say, okay, let's sit down and let's talk about what do you like to do? What are you good at today? Because what you have to do is find what they like doing and then apply that to this challenge. So if they like social media, okay, we have a place for you. We can share ideas there. If they like engineering, okay, we're going to guide you to the right degree so that you can invent something that's going to solve the problem. And there really is a place for everyone in this. It's just about listening to those young people and directing them towards where they can make the biggest impact. And that's the part that brings me the greatest satisfaction in the AVF.
Yeah, it's such a great story. Because how do you make sure that all these 30 volunteers now. That you empower them and that they keep involved, because that's the difficult part, I think, because the association is growing, but you and Max are the founders. How do you keep them all involved and empowered?
Yeah, so some of the ways we've kept our team motivated and involved has been really, some standard business and organizational practices. So as we've grown, we've had to set up smaller divisions, and we've had to elevate some of our first volunteers to leadership positions. We've had to find ways to compensate them, right? To give them benefits for their leadership because they've been loyal and because they've done hard work. This is like in any organization. So that answer maybe is a little bit boring, but I'm grateful that Max and I, as leaders of our own organizations, can bring that experience to this nonprofit organization. So that's one way, and so it's a matter of saying, okay, we used to only have weekly meetings. Now we have our weekly meeting, and then the divisions now have their own weekly meetings. And then they send us weekly reports, we read the reports, we check on the progress, and then we step in when something is not performing as well as it should, and we give them a timeline. We say, you need to improve by this time, or there's not a place for you in the organization. And so you need to be tough with young people too. You can't just be all sunshine and butterflies. It's a real business and real organization, otherwise nothing gets done. So, Max and I are pretty tough like that sometimes. But even if they're struggling, we'll usually step in and we'll usually just give the extra energy to get involved. It happens very often that they lose their way, or they say, well, why am I doing this? Or what was the reason I started? Or I'm not moving fast enough. And I just get on one-on-one conversations with them. I Skype with them, and I talk to them, and I listen to them, and I take the extra time to do that. And I think it's easier because, I'm 30 now, and some of our volunteers are younger, but we're same generation. So I can talk to them like a millennial would talk to a millennial, and we can get on the same page and find the way to move forward.
How do you think vertical farming will play a role in the climate change and in the food production, because we have a big challenge we're facing? How will vertical farming play a role in this?
There will be several ways how vertical farming can solve the food security challenges of the future. The first one is the knowledge of how to grow food. So when we look at the average age of the US farmer in the United States, it's 58 years old. That's the average age, okay? So we've missed a whole generation, maybe 2 generations of farmers. As urbanization has developed, the young farmers, the children of the farmers rather, have moved to the city. Why? Because they want great jobs, they want to be with their friends, they want the opportunities, and who can blame them? So farming needs to evolve to respond to those kinds of interests. And it's very difficult for soil-based conventional farming to respond to that because it's outside of the city in most cases, and it's not as high-tech as it could be. When you look at vertical farming, alternatively, you've got lights and water and sensors and biomass all embedded in this. And it's amazing to see the enthusiasm that young people have for this technology. For the first time in 2 generations, we're seeing young people excited about agriculture. This is our opportunity to change the knowledge base that we need to feed our society. This is the chance, because this is what young people are excited about. So what we're trying to do is to bombard them with knowledge and connections and the right companies, and strengthen the companies that can hire them in the future to catch up with the loss of knowledge that we have. That's number one, is really setting up the new knowledge base for this. Number 2 is when we think about the circular economy, when we think about a society where resources are shared and transferred around, vertical farms will play a role in that because they really represent that food, water, energy nexus in the urban environment. So you can think solar panels, okay? It's energy in the built environment. Wastewater management, water and some energy in the built environment. But what technologies out there really involve biomass, water, and energy in one system? Vertical farming really does that. And also there are waste issues that are embodied in that. So when we think about the circular economy, vertical farming as this ambitious, unusual, crazy thing actually might hold the key to solving that and figuring it out. Because in vertical farms you have to track all of those resources. It's very expensive. You have to understand what's going in and out of it. And those data inputs and those data outputs are what are going to hold the key to helping us understand how do we build a more circular economy in our cities. So that's number 2. And then number 3, I think, is really around literally yield, okay, and really growing food year-round. Now, I don't think vertical farms are going to feed everyone. That's not the point, okay? Again, I think it's more like a gateway of technology to other technologies that will improve the food system. But if we look at the food system from a more segmented approach, from different sections, why are we growing lettuce in California? It doesn't make sense. Lettuce and microgreens and smaller greens should be grown in vertical farms close to cities. The technology is pretty much proven now. You can actually make economic models. And so in and around the city, I expect there to be vertical farms. And cities and states themselves should incentivize those farms to be there. But tomatoes, peppers, these other crops should be grown around the city in large greenhouses where they can be grown economically using the sun and not necessarily using artificial light. I think in some places that will work, but in the majority of places we are going to want to use the free sunlight to grow those crops. And then once that is done, then let's look at the staple crops that don't make sense to grow indoors in greenhouse or vertical farm and grow them in soil in the limited arable land we have. So I think we need to connect the incentives with the systems that make the most sense. And I think vertical farming is one of those systems.
Last question. We have enough material.
Okay.
My last question is, where will the AVF be in 10 years?
Wow. So in 10 years, the AVF will have chapters in every continent. Okay, so we'll have regional managers in every continent. Right now, we are mostly in the Northern Hemisphere. That's mostly because of the development question and because of the climate needs for vertical farming. But that will change in 10 years. There'll be a need for it more in South America, Africa, and also Australia. That's one thing. Also, we will have research centers. So we will have places where transparency around data will be king. So we'll have places where our members can demonstrate their technologies, where they can collaborate with actual physical systems. So we will have research farms, I would say, in the US, Europe, and Asia. Definitely at least one in each within 10 years. Ideally, there would be one headquarters with a conference area where we can gather and do not so much big conferences, but more like workshops. Very focused on education and personal development, professional development, diversity in this industry. We need more women involved in it, so I hope to see more female leadership in the AVF 10 years from now. And I think, as I said, we will have some physical vertical farms for research purposes by then. Yeah, thank you. Anytime.